Evening everyone, welcome back to my channel, True Crime with Jess Rose. How you all doing? I've got a new lipstick on, but I've realised it looks like I'm going clubbing in the 90s. I seen a TikTok and they were actually mocking this lipstick, that it was from the 90s, and now that it's on camera I get it. But it's too late now, I've started. Thank you to all my new subscribers that I've had this week. I've been talking to a few of you, and a lovely lady I've been speaking to the past few days. So hope you're all doing okay. Obviously, thank you for all my likes and comments. And I want to crack straight on with this one now. I say it quite a lot. I don't particularly like doing stories about young children. I genuinely don't. For obvious reasons. Now, I'm doing this one because, like the Elsa Garcia story that I've done a while ago, but it is on my channel, this young girl is still alive, but her early life was so horrific. You'll probably know the story as I'm talking about it. And again, it wasn't one I was going to do because it is her early life when she was a very young girl. And it's going to be so hard to do, but she's in the headlines again, and I just thought it was so sad. And I just felt I wanted to do this one, so I've looked into it. I've tried to get as much information up to date as I can for you. So like the title that I've put on, it's The Girl in the Closet, and it's the story of Lauren Kavanagh. Now, Lauren was born on the 12th of April 93. And her biological mother was called Barbara Calhoun. Now, Barbara already had a little girl when Lauren was born, and I think Barbara was she's called Barbara, her name's Barbara, but they call her Barbie, and she had a toddler. She was 21. She didn't really have anywhere to live, and she was staying with a couple who had relatives that desperately wanted children but couldn't have them, and they wanted to adopt, and it just became an option for Barbie. Like I say, she had a toddler. She didn't have a lot going on. And she didn't want Lauren. So over the 9 months, she got to know the couple, who was called Sabrina and Bill Kavanagh. Now, sorry, this is in Texas, obviously in America. And lovely couple. And, got on with Barbie and, supported her through her pregnancy. And when Lauren was born, they obviously straight away were over the moon. Offered Barbie to hold Lauren, which she dismissed Lauren from the get-go. And it said after the fact that Lauren felt betrayed, that these people she thought were friends, as soon as she gave them her baby, they didn't want to know her anymore. The other side is that they asked her if she wanted to hold Lauren, and it was actually Barbie that was quite dismissive of the whole thing. Anyway, the paperwork was signed through with a social worker, and and they left with Lauren. And for 8 months, it was amazing. They had this beautiful, chubby little girl. They were giving her a lovely life. And she was happy. She was a happy little girl. But after 8 months, the Kavanaghs received a call. And it was Barbie saying she wanted her daughter back. And, they were like, no, you'll have to get a solicitor. Obviously dismissed it. Now, what had happened in the meantime, Barbie had spoken to her mum. Now, Barbie was also, she was adopted, sorry. Her adopted mother was Doris Calhoun. Now, Barbie, always wanting her mum to come back, her biological mum, I suppose, and always feeling that sense of betrayal that her mum had given her away, in essence, to Doris. It was said that she didn't want Lauren feeling that. Well, this is what she told Doris anyway. This is what she told her mum. So Doris started looking into getting Lauren back for Barbie, because Doris was she was a paralegal. So she's investigating, and there happens to be she finds that the adopted paperwork that was sent off, Barbie's parental rights hadn't been terminated. So technically there was nothing stopping Barbie from getting Lauren back. Now, her circumstances hadn't become any better. She, by this point, had a little boy as well. Now, but sorry, I fast forwarded a little bit there. This started off when Lauren was 8 months and continued for another year, with obviously the Kavanaghs saying, no, this is our daughter, you know, we adopted her, finding out that Lauren's parental rights hadn't been terminated, and there was a battle in court over Lauren. Now, what the courts want, it was like a reunification thing that they wanted to do, and when it was shown that the parental rights hadn't been terminated, that was the technicality that got the adoption thrown out. And so the Kavanaghs were instructed to start off, you know, getting Lauren to know Barbie again. Now, by this point, Barbie was with a Ken, believe it or not. She'd married a man named Kenneth Atkinson. So Barbie was now Barbie Atkinson. And, yeah, she decided, you know, she wanted Lauren back. And so they were bringing Lauren to get to know Ken and Barbie and her sister and her younger brother. So her older sister and a younger brother. The older sister is called Blake, and was 2 years older than Lauren. Her younger brother was obviously very, very young. And by this point, Lauren was, I think she was about 18 months when they started reintroducing her to Barbie and Ken. And when she was coming back to the Kavanaghs, Sabrina, her adopted mom, was saying there was like marks on her. There was nappy rash. There was bruises. And she was saying, you know, she was taking photos and she was saying they're abusing her. And the judge was saying, you're causing more damage than they will ever do by putting her through this. Well, the one occasion when Lauren came back, there was blood in a nappy. So Sabrina took her straight up to the hospital. And the hospital basically said, because Lauren was so young, that to put her through a sexual abuse investigation it'd be painful. So unless she was 100% sure that was what was going on, they didn't want to go through with that. And she wasn't 100%, and she didn't want to put Lauren through that, so she had to back down. So when Lauren was 20 months old, the reunification was completed, and they met Barbie in a Walmart car park and had to hand Lauren over. And Sabrina even tried. She says, you know, if you change your mind, or have you changed your mind, you know, we don't have to go through with this. And Barbie was like, do you know what she said? She says, my mum's paid too much now for the lawyer, so I've got to go through with it. And basically it was said that Barbie had changed her mind about wanting Lauren back, But because her mum, the paralegal, had started the process and hired a lawyer and everything else, she didn't want to annoy her mum by saying, actually, I've changed my mind. She thought she spent too much money. It was found out she'd spent $650. That was it. And so she didn't want to tell her mum she changed her mind about having Lauren back. So Lauren goes to live with Ken and Barbie. Over the next 6 years, Lauren was moved around a lot, and Barbie went on to have 3 more children, 2 boys and a girl. So Lauren actually had 5 siblings, 1 older, 4 younger. Not that she would know, really, or be aware, because when Lauren first moved back, Ken, I believe, came and went out of their lives, because it was said that Barbie actually got, in the 6 years that Lauren was living with her, she actually got married and divorced twice. Not a lot said about that, but she ends up back with Ken. He's the father of her youngest 3 children, I believe. But when she got Lauren back, it was said that she didn't have a lot of time for her, so she started off just leaving her on a pallet beside her. Then now, like I say, Lauren was 20 months when she was handed back to Barbie. So she was obviously into things and stuff, and because she was getting into things, she put her in a closet and put like a gate up against it. Whereas Lauren got older, she'd push the gate down, so Barbie in the end just closed the door. And over the next 6 years, although they moved around a lot, there was always a cupboard to put Lauren in. Always. Or under the stairs, or in just a closet. There was always somewhere she was put. Now, when Lauren was 8 years old, Ken, who was, by this point, they were living just outside Dallas in Texas on like a trailer park, him and Barbie were living, and Barbie would go off quite often, having, meeting up with guys off the internet. Ken apparently had got bored of this and invited a neighbour in. He goes, do you want to come and see Barbie's little secret? And the neighbour said she thought it was drugs or something, like a weed plant or so. She thought it was, nothing too malicious. She says he walked to the back of the trailer, moved some clothing from out of the closet, out of the way of the closet door, opened the closet door, and she said she heard Ken say, "Hi, Lauren." And on the floor of this closet was Lauren, naked, her head riddled with lice. She said her arms looked like they were an inch wide. She was practically transparent. And she just said she didn't know what to do. And Ken showed her and then closed the closet door and walked them back out of the trailer. And she ran straight into her trailer, phoned the police, and the police came round. Now, Ken, realising this is what his neighbour, I think her name was Jeannie her name was, realising she was about to do that, he went in, took Lauren out of the cupboard, the closet, put a jumper on and sat her at the table. Now, if you look up, when I finish the story, Lauren Kavanagh or the girl in the closet, the photo you'll see is actually what was taken the day the policeman rescued her. His name was Gary McLean, and this was in 2001. It's just horrific, because you see photos of Lauren back in 94, just before she was handed over to Barbie in December of 94, And she was a chubby, cute little girl, happy. And then you see this little girl, and she looks like she's about 2. And it's actually said that she didn't grow beyond 2.5. She was actually £25. She was aged 8, in case she was 8 years old, and she was £25. She hadn't grown any more than a 2.5-year-old. And he was just, he couldn't believe what he was looking at, because he says, I'm here about an 8-year-old little girl. And Ken was like, that's Lauren. And Lauren, for the past 6 years, had been put through every abuse you'd ever heard of. One of the doctors at the hospital actually said that she dealt with sexual abuse, she dealt with physical abuse, she dealt with mental, emotional abuse, she obviously neglect, but they'd never come up against a child that had all 5 committed against them. Like I say, the neglect, she wasn't loved. She was beaten regularly. When she was taken out of that closet, and the only reason she was taken out of that closet, because she wasn't allowed to go to the toilet, that was her toilet as well. She was fed in there when she was fed. Her oldest sibling, Blake, used to try and sneak her bread or dog food or anything she could. But when Barbie and Ken realised someone was feeding her, they propped things up against the closet, so even Blake couldn't get in there to help her. Don't forget, Blake was only 2 years older than Lauren. The only time she was taken out of the closet was to beat and sexually abuse, not just by Ken, but by Barbie as well, and a lot of their friends. They used to blast country music to drown out her screams, and Barbie and Ken and their friends used to have a wild old time with Lauren. She'd be tied down from the age of 2 to the bed, her legs and her arms. It was horrific abuse. And then when they would finished, they would beat her, burn her with cigarettes, and then throw her back in the closet. Just this story, honestly, I looked at quite a few places. I've listened to a podcast on it, and I had to practice telling you, because it's one of the worst I've heard of what happened to a child. It just everyone who came into contact with Lauren. Now the police, obviously, upon finding her, took her out of there, took her straight to the hospital. And everyone that came into contact with her was just crying, because Lauren, even though she'd had no contact with people, the country music channel that they loved to play to drown out her screams was played a lot anyway during the day, and that's how she learnt to talk. Through the it said, the newscasters and the DJs having banter in between songs, and she had quite a big vocabulary. She could talk, she could hold a conversation, but she hadn't learnt any, obviously, social skills. So when she got to the hospital, and people were very curious about this little girl that had been found in a closet and had been there for 6 years. She hadn't been in the same closet. I think people think she was in the same closet for 6 years, but she was in the equivalent in all the other properties they lived at. And they'd go and speak to her, and they ended up having to get professional help for their nurses and, nurses that had gone in there to talk to her, because Lauren was so blunt, and she'd openly say what had been done to her, to the point where nurses were walking back out of Lauren's hospital room crying. So they had to stop people going in to visit her. For her as well. Now also because she hadn't been getting fed, and she obviously weighed next to nothing for an 8-year-old child, what they found in her stomach was bits of plastic and fur and carpet fibres, where she'd been so hungry, she'd been chipping the wood off the doors and the frames and eating her own hair, and obviously she couldn't digest that, so it really messed her stomach up. So they had to try and discover how to start feeding her without upsetting her stomach. She was also lactose intolerant, which didn't help, and so trying to get her healthy, they had that to contend with as well. And also when they were doing some other tests of Lauren, obviously to realise, to say she'd been sexually assaulted, they came up with something that they'd only ever read about. And Lauren, see, I'm struggling to look at the camera. Her vagina and her anus were one, because of how brutally and often she'd been raped. So it says that her genital area had been very, very badly deformed, and was abnormal. So she would have to go through a lot of surgeries to fix that. It goes on. It just goes on. What was done to this girl. Now, Sabrina and Bill, remember Kavanagh, who'd originally adopted her, Bill phoned Sabrina and he says, what was the name of that Barbie and Ken who took Lauren back? And she goes, Atkinson. And he was like, they're on the news. So what do you mean they're on the news? So an 8-year-old girl's been found in a closet that's been badly abused, and apparently she's been kept in there for 6 years. She's been kept in the closet for 6 years. And Sabrina was like, Lauren's been gone for 6 years, but she obviously didn't want to believe it. And then she said her sister then phoned her saying similar, and she goes, look, just watch the news tonight and let me know. And while Sabrina was at work, she seen her family pulling up outside while she was on a cigarette break, and she broke down because she knew. And they came over and they're, it's Lauren. And she hadn't wanted to believe, although she told them, she told the court, she told the judge, you're sending her to be abused. She never wanted to believe it. So they spent 3 days, getting in touch with the police, getting in touch with the hospital where Lauren was at, telling them, she was our daughter from a day after she was born, and then through a technicality, Barbie got her back. I want to see her, we need to see her. And eventually they let Sabrina and Bill come to the hospital, and they just watched Lauren for a little while, because Lauren was being evaluated. She had a lot of tests. They needed to know mentally how she was, so the doctors weren't ready to introduce Bill and Sabrina to Lauren as well. They didn't want to overwhelm her. But eventually they brought them into her, and it said she looked up at them. She says, is this my new mum and dad? And no one had mentioned that to her. So everyone was just quite surprised, because she was a very resilient girl, and she would smile, and she's got cutest dimples, cute dimples. And it said that she was just happy, and then you get other people questioning that, like, she's been through all that. How can she be happy? And could you imagine going through all that and then realising you're safe? You know, that would be your reaction, I'm assuming. Well, some, you know, who knows? It's like they say it was to have a child that had received all 5, you know, ways of being abused brutally for years. It was unprecedented. They didn't know what to do with Lauren. It's been said. So she was in the hospital for 5 weeks, and the doctor said they couldn't think of anyone else they would allow Lauren to go back with but Sabrina and Bill. They could see that they weren't there because Lauren was this, you know, sensational story, you know, this child that, you know, could be looked into. They loved her. She was their baby. And they couldn't think of anyone else that they would want Lauren to go home with. So she went home with the Kavanaghs, but they weren't really given any advice of how to look after Lauren and how to even to know what to expect, because no one knew. And there was a lot of times that Lauren was triggered during the years she was back with the Kavanaghs. If she heard country music, you know, it would trigger her. She once saw, she was at a McDonald's playground, and she started crying to Bill, saying they're putting the baby in the trunk, they're putting the baby in the trunk. And it was found out she reacted that way to someone simply putting suitcases in their trunk across the car park. She reacted that way because the only time Barbie and Ken would let her out of that closet, when not abusing her in the bedroom, was to put her in the trunk and take her to men that I'd met on the internet that had paid for Lauren, and they would drop her off to these men and then pick her up a few hours later. Just horrific. Or they'd go to a drive-through and get food with the other kids, and Lauren would be in the boot, the trunk, starving, listening to them. You know, the other kids that lived in that trailer, they weren't, you know, the trailer was disgusting. It was said it was disgusting. There was dirty clothes everywhere. There was rubbish everywhere. There was animal faces everywhere. You know, the kids were sometimes having to find food out of bins. You know, they didn't have a great life themselves, them children, but nothing compared to Lauren. You know, as disgusting as that trailer was, you know, when you seen that closet, the police said that when they walked in, their feet actually sunk in to the carpet because of the urine. Those faces all around the closet. They actually took the door out off for evidence, because there was Lauren's little fingerprints from trying to get out. They took the carpet up for evidence to show in court. You know, she was kept in the dark. It just... So, Ken and Sabrina and Bill obviously were trying to give Lauren just everything, but that, you know, she got to a point where even though she was getting fed and they'd worked out to give her little meals, you know, often, she'd hoard food and she'd hide it under a pillow. And even though they would always leave biscuits and, well, cookies and pink lemonade on the side for her, she said even up to date, she still hoards food in her room just in case. You know, so that stuck with her. They were trying to help how to raise Lauren, you know, as she was getting older. You know, Sabrina wasn't too sure how to discipline her. She didn't want to take her stuff away because it didn't matter. She'd never had toys, so taking her stuff away didn't matter. Put her in time out. She'd spent 6 years in time out. So Sabrina did say she would spank Lauren, and there's been mixed reviews over that. But as Sabrina says, there's a difference between discipline and abuse, and she obviously wasn't abusing Lauren, she was disciplining her. Now Barbie and Ken, like I say, in the court case where the closet door was brought in and the carpet from the closet was brought in, that was unravelled in the court. And the smell went round the court straight away, just to give an inkling, of what this girl had been through. She'd, they didn't want to bring Lauren in to testify about the sexual abuse. There was no way she was strong enough for that, so they had to go ahead and prosecute Barbie and Ken without Lauren. But they had a lot to go on. She had cigarette burns all over her, puncture marks, face and her back, and and just so much damage. And Barbie, and in 2001, 2001, sorry, Barbie and Ken were given life, but they're eligible for parole in 2031. So they've got 30 years. That's only 10 years away. But Lauren will be 38. That's them too. Now, in 2003, Bill actually died when Lauren was 10, which is, it's very sad. And I actually watched a lot of Lauren's story as well on Dr. Phil. He'd done like a special, and she talks about Bill, and they had a farm, Sabrina and Bill did, so she used to spend a lot of time with Bill, feeding the animals and everything else, so you could see they had a very special bond. So she just get very upset talking about Bill obviously passing. She talks about the abuse on the show. Now, on the one I watched, there's 2 where she appears on Dr. Phil, and she was 18 and 21. The one I really watched was when she's 21, and that's in 2016. Sorry, she's 23 in 2016. She was 18 in 2011, that's right. And she says, what happened to her living with Sabrina and Bill and her life, and how she had to get used to sleeping in a bed. They'd find her in the closet a lot, which sounds confusing, but when you think of it, it's not, because if the only time you were safe was in the closet, because every time you were taken out was to be beaten and raped and abused, I suppose it would become a safe space for you. So, they used to take the closet doors off because they didn't want her doing that, But Sabrina was quite strict, and she wouldn't let Lauren stay out. She wouldn't let her stop out with friends or anything. She was trying to protect her. But social service and everyone who was still involved with Lauren, was saying, come on, loosen up the reins a little bit. Not just social services, but family members and everything else. So 2005, when Lauren was 13, Sabrina finally allows her to stay at her niece's, to Sabrina's niece's, which would be Lauren's cousin. And she was only staying overnight. But the niece's husband, knowing everything that Lauren had been through, everyone knew, the world knew what Lauren had been through. He took her out to the barn and raped her. And I think that got me. That really got me. Just in the sense of, you knew. And she'd got happy. She was happy again. And it was the first time her mum, and I will call Sabrina her mum, had let her and trusted. And she was only trusting her with a family member. It was her own niece, you know, Lauren's cousin. And you did that. He did go to prison for it. You know, Lauren spoke up. This is what I mean. She's quite a blunt girl. You know, you even see in the interview, she's quite blunt. You know, she doesn't faff about with the words. And she told Sabrina when she got home, he did go to jail for that. I just thought. So when she's 23, on Dr. Phil in 2016, she admits also that, you know, at the age of 15, 16, she started to have suicidal thoughts, obviously, but she'd been cutting herself. And, you know, by this point, at 23, she had a girlfriend. Can't blame her. I mean that in the sense of you're never going to hear a man again. Ever. You know, mind you wouldn't get hear a woman again, really, after a mum as well, would you? But she put her trust in a girl called Janae, who's on the show, and she seemed like a lovely girl. And on the show, she was offered it was called Creative Care. It was like a treatment place, and a new apartment, rent free for a year. And you know, she was offered this chance at 23 to continue. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. She did graduate with her class, Lauren did, and she did go to college. But given everything she'd gone through, she'd struggled to get into the workforce, and which you can imagine, and she couldn't trust people at all. Even Janae, she admitted, she didn't trust. And it's not that she didn't want to love people, she just didn't feel she could. You know, she was never shown love for the years when it's most important to, you know, that 2 to 6, 2 to 8 for those 6 years. She never learnt the things that we learn, right and wrong, love, you know, cuddles, socially acceptable keys, you know, things that you learn, and she never learnt that. So love doesn't come easy to Lauren. And you watch that and it leaves you feeling so good. And then on December the 19th, 2018, Lauren was booked into the Denton County Jail. Lauren had been talking to a 14-year-old girl on Facebook, and the girl's parents had found the messages. And it turns out she'd been having a sexual relationship with her. Oh, it's just, do you know, part of me didn't even want to tell you that bit. I didn't even want to do the last bit of my story, because it was ending on a positive, and that it looked like everything was going to be rainbows for Lauren. But yeah, 3 charges of sexual abuse of a minor, and could face up to 20 years in jail. Now, she'd been recommended to be committed to a mental health facility last year in 2020, whilst awaiting her trial, because the judge didn't think she was mentally competent to stand trial, basically. Now, that was in September 2020, but because of COVID, as of December 2020, so just a couple of months ago, she's still in jail in Denton, and not the hospital because of coronavirus. So that's as up to date as I know at the moment. And that's as of yesterday. That was the most up-to-date information I could get. Oh, it's just so sad, isn't it? I didn't want to end it. I mean, you know, most of the stories people have passed, but it's just such a shame, you know, that that's how it's, how, you know, you've got Elsa Garcia. The only thing I can say is with Elsa Garcia in her 20s, you know, after all the abuse of Elsa as well. Now, it says that Lauren was in the top 3 in the country of worst abused children who lived. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming Elsa Garcia would be in that top 3 who lived, because we know Elsa Garcia as well, you know, had all of those abuses done to her too, obviously for a much longer period of time. And in her 20s, we've seen that she, you know, hit alcohol and wasn't doing too good. And, you know, in her 30s now, it looks like things are looking up. But the 14-year-old girl, has said that she loves Lauren, and that, you know, she wasn't raped by her, but at 14 it'd be classed as grooming, obviously, because you're not mentally able to commit to that kind of relationship, especially a sexual relationship. I just don't know how to, you can't excuse, you know, Barbie was adopted by her mum, Doris Calhoun, and it said that she adopted Barbie when Barbie was 3 or 4. I've seen different platforms, different ages on 3 or 4, and it said that before she adopted Barbie was passed from pillar to post by her biological mother, and was raped on multiple occasions by men until she was adopted at between either 3 or 4. And so you don't give that excuse to Barbie for what was they done to Lauren, but then you can't compare what was done to Lauren to what's happened to these 14. I'd love to know your opinion. I'm really torn. I don't know how I feel about it. I don't. After doing the story and knowing the horrific things that have happened to her, and I'd need another hour to go through everything in look, real in depth. So do you say that sexual abuse of a minor, the 14-year-old, do we excuse that because of what happened to Lauren in those 6 years? And then when she was 13, don't forget. I'd like your opinions, because I don't know with this one. It's so hard. It's so upsetting. It's so sad. I'd love to say Lauren's going to get a happy ever after. I just don't know. I don't know if she is. Barbara Atkinson. Please have a look at her and Ken. Ugh, just, you know, there was Sandra Mahoney. No, sorry, Emily Owens. Sandra Mahoney was Lauren's in-home play therapist while she was growing up. And then there was a lady by the name of Emily Owens, who was a child abuse detective, who also done like a prayer group within the prison that Barbie was in, and Barbie asked her to pray with her. And you see on the documentary, you know, this Emily literally rocking, talking about it, but she did pray with her. But she said it wasn't even for Barbie, it was for herself, to try and get rid of that hatred. There is also a video of Barbie, if you put in a Barbie or Barbara Atkinson, saying her apology to Lauren. I think it was done about a year after Lauren was found, so I think it was 2002. And oh, it's just it's cringe. It's actually cringe-worthy because she talks about it herself. She wasn't sorry. I think she said something like, love hurts, but it hurt you, Lauren. You were hurt, but I can't think of her exact wording, but you want to pull her out of the screen when you're watching it. There's just so many, to have a look, there's so much online about it. You know, there are pictures of Lauren when she was found, and you know, and how she looked before they got hold of her, and how she looked, you know, right up until she was 23. I haven't seen any after that. You know, now this year she'll be 28. And I just really hope there's a happy ending for Lauren out there. I genuinely do. I really do. For Sabrina's benefit as well. You know, it'd just be nice for her to see Lauren happy as well, I think, after everything they've both been through. So yeah, that's the story of Lauren Kavanagh, the girl in the closet. And thank you for joining me. It's a really long one, but thank you. And yeah, just a really sad story. But let me know what you think. Let me know how you think that'll play out in the court. I just don't know. You know, if I was the girl's parents, would I excuse it when my daughter's concerned? Oh, I don't know what to say. I genuinely don't. I don't know. Even when I was talking about it yesterday, I was like, I don't know how I'd feel. In one breath, I'd be like, I don't care what you've been through. That was my little girl. You know, 14 or not, she's still my little girl. And you've groomed her. And then in the next breath, I'm like, oh, but what she went through, did she not know any better? Oh, it's just so hard. But thank you again for joining me. Please comment. And if you're watching, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it as well. I'm not going to do the jingle. But thanks again for joining me. And I'll see you again soon. Thank you.